performing Vishnu Yaga specifically, one could even achieve the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, yagna is intended to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. While Pururava was meditating upon Urvasi, the Trecha Yuga began, and therefore the Vedic yagnas were revealed in his heart. But Pururava and enjoying the senses. Yagnas meant for the enjoyment of the senses are called karma kandiya yagnas. Therefore, he decided to perform karma kandiya yagnas to fulfill his lusty desires. In other words, karma kandiya yagnas are meant for sensuous persons, whereas yagnas should actually be performed to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To please the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Kali Yuga, the Sankirtan Yagna is recommended. Yagnai Sankirtanai Prayar Yajantihi Sumedasa. Only those who are very intelligent take to Sankirtan Yagna to fulfill all their desires, material and spiritual, whereas those who are lusty for sense enjoyment perform Karma Kandiya Yagnas. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pracharane, Nirvashesha, Sunyavani, Tasta, Jadesha Tarane. Omagana Timarandasha, Janan Janan Shalakaya, Chakshuram Militam Vena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam, Pangam Langa Yateginam, Yaktamaham Bande, Shingurum Dinatam. Before I begin, I would like to express my appreciation and gratitude for all the seva, all the devotees here and the volunteer workers do for New Mayapur Dham. And I was a pujari for over almost 20 years, so I'm well aware of what goes on behind the curtains, how many hundreds of hours of service going on around the deities, making garlands, making clothes, cooking, cleaning, doing artiques, changing the deities. And devotees are cleaning the temple, cooking in the kitchen. You're cooking for like 40, 50 devotees every single day. Devotees are looking after the gardens, cutting the grass, looking after the cows. There's such an incredible amount of seva and bhakti being rendered in this community. And when you walk into this community, you feel the sum total of all that bhakti permeating the atmosphere. So I very much appreciate the atmosphere. It's very, makes me happy to be here. So this is a very unusual and interesting part of the Bhagavatam. King Pururava was extremely materialistic. I think probably clinically he could be termed an addict. He was so obsessed with one thing, sex. He was meditating all night on Urvasi, continually throughout this whole pastime. He was continually just thinking about one thing. And that's one clinical symptom of addiction, that you're obsessed with it. And another symptom is that it actually interferes with the execution of your normal life. So we'll read how King Pururava in the next verse, he's so obsessed with this one thing that he's even thinking about it when he's performing a yagna. So that's an addiction. And we see that he was not a very happy man because he was always waiting for the opportunity to meet Urvasi once a year, and that was his seemingly only happiness. So that is what Srila Prabhupada would refer to as grihamedi, materialistic life, a life living for the satisfaction of the senses. And I'd also like to contrast that life and consciousness of King Pururava with a very great Grihastha devotee mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, who is Kardama Muni. So there's a very vast difference between Kardama Muni and King Pururava. So again, King Pururava was just completely absorbed in sense gratification. You read in the beginning of this chapter, or this section of King Pururava, he meets Rasi, and within one sloka, within 3 sentences, he says, "Nice to meet you, you're very attractive, let's engage in sex together." That's his consciousness. And if any of you were, probably no one here was living in the 70s, there was a famous song, it was, "Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name?" But what's wrong with that? You don't even know someone and you're telling them, "Oh, I love you." Something's wrong with that picture. So in contrast with the Doors, who sang that song, and King Purava, we have the example of Kardama Muni, who performed great austerities in the forest. It's described for 10,000 years. So you can imagine doing austerities in devotional service for 10,000 years. And after this period of 10,000 years, he looked up from his meditation and he actually saw Garuda descending from the sky with Lord Vishnu standing on his back. And Garuda alighted in front of Kardama Muni. And the Lord described to Kardama Muni, how he was very pleased by the execution of his austerities in devotional service. So he was very pleased with Kardama Muni's austerities. And then we read how Kardama Muni, he glorifies the Lord, and then he also says how unfortunate people, they approach the Lord for fulfillment of materialistic desires. So sometimes in the Bhagavatam there's these interesting contradictions. So in one verse, Kardama Muni, he's condemning people who approach the Lord for fulfillment of material desires. But in the next verse, Kardama Muni says, "Well, my dear Lord," he said, I think I need a wife of like disposition to fulfill my desires so I can execute my service. So that's very interesting. And you can imagine what Kardama Muni has gone through. And sometimes we think about our life, what direction it's going to take, how can we become Krishna conscious. Well, Kardama Muni, he just did that for 10,000 years. So you can imagine the great introspection he performed during that time to try to understand Krishna, to understand his real nature. And his conclusion of his austerity was he realized he needed to get married. He needed to get married. So he wanted a wife who could help him in the execution of his duties. So he was complete opposite of King Purava, who was just thinking of one thing. Kardama Muni, he was thinking of how to advance in spiritual life and what was his best position, the best ashram he could be in to execute spiritual life. And the Lord actually blessed him. You don't hear the Lord saying, "Well, Kardama Muni, you should stay in the brahmacharya ashram, you're Maya." The Lord said, yes. He said, actually, Swayambhuva Manu, he's in the area and he's coming here with his daughter who actually has kind of a crush on you. She's heard about you from Narada Muni and she's interested in you. And so we read how Kardama Muni, Devahuti, they got married. And so we read in the Bhagavatam, there's descriptions of something called the deep, dark well of materialistic life. And so that is where Purava was. He was in this deep, dark well of conditioned life. So that is Grihamedi life. And Prabhupada, he would also sometimes make that very clear. There's Grihamedi and then there's Grihasta. That's 2 different things. Grihasta is an ashram for making spiritual advancement. So we see, as opposed to a deep, dark well, how we had this aerial, palatial mansion that they traveled all over the universe to different exotic places. And the result of this marriage of Kardama Muni and Devahuti was that they had 9 very saintly daughters. And also, as the Lord had promised Kardama Muni, the Lord promised he would appear as Kardama Muni's son, Lord Kapila did. So that was such an exalted union, such an exalted Grihastha ashram. So Kardama Muni, he's, if you want to say, setting the gold standard of what a Grihastha is. That One is concerned about making spiritual advancement. One is looking for a partner to assist him or her in that spiritual advancement. And together they will fulfill their material propensities in Krishna consciousness and be happy and set an example for others. So that's a very important example in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So here you see King Purava was so obsessed. And in the material world today, the culture is actually, it's geared towards that mentality, especially media and advertising. If you want to sell something, the media tends to objectify women to make men think, if I purchase this product or do this certain thing, it will increase my sexual appeal and I will attract women. That's the whole thrust of it. And it reinforces that materialistic mentality. And especially today, in the last 15, 20 years, there's been a proliferation of pornography, which has become extremely problematic in society. It's everywhere, it's on cell phones, it's on computers, in the privacy of your home. And sometimes people think, well, this is just some innocent entertainment. It doesn't really affect anyone else, and it doesn't really affect me. But actually, it's very detrimental. Just as King Purava, he just became obsessed and addicted by Urvasi. People who frequent pornography, they can actually become addicted. And what actually happens when people view pornography, it produces dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone. So if someone's viewing pornography, it makes them feel good. They continue to do it more and more and more, and then what happens, your body produces something called dopamine, which is the pleasure hormone, and your body also has receptors that help you perceive that pleasure. When you engage in addictive activities, whether it's drugs or pornography or gambling, adrenaline is produced, and then if there's an excessive amount of that activity, the receptors of that dopamine become worn out. They can't actually experience that pleasure. So what happens, people who become chronic gamblers, they gamble more and more. People who drink more and more. People who take drugs end up taking more and more stronger drugs. And people who tend to enter into pornography and become addicted to pornography, they tend to need something that's more and more graphic, even to the point where it involves violence. And so that is very problematic, extremely problematic in society. And individuals who can develop pornography addiction can actually have a great difficulty in having normal, healthy relationships, because just their whole system has been destroyed. It's interesting, even within our society, there's a very nice gentleman, PhD, John Yasinchuk. He's a specialist in addiction and recovery and trauma. And he's actually started a recovery group within our society for all kinds of addicts, pornography addiction, drug addiction. And it's actually an online program so people can get some support to try to free themselves from addictions. So that is a great problem in this world. And it's something we need to be very careful in our lives, that we understand that sex is meant to be within marriage, with one's religiously married wife. That's religious. That's sanctified. And to think of other women, what to speak of, look at other women in a lustful way or pornography, it actually transgresses that principle. One of my godbrothers, Ishan Prabhu, he told me an interesting story. He was in England when Prabhupada was there in the beginning of the movement in England, and Prabhupada was staying on John Lennon's estate. And so he was a new devotee at the time, coming to the temple. Some devotees were living on John Lennon's estate. He was living outside, and he would come on the bus every day to see Prabhupada, come to the program, and do service. So he told me one day he was in a room with two of the senior devotees there, and they were having a over who should give Prabhupada his massage every day. So both of them wanted to give Prabhupada the massage. And one godbrother was saying, well, I can actually do it better than you. And the other godbrother was saying, no, I actually know how to do it best. And they were arguing back and forth. And this went on for a while. And finally, the two of them decided, well, let's go ask Srila Prabhupada who he wants to be massaged by. So they walked into Srila Prabhupada's room, and Ishan, he thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to get to see Prabhupada. So he tagged along and went in the room. And so the three of them are in the room with Prabhupada, and so the two other godbrothers say, well, Srila Prabhupada, we can't come to a conclusion over who should give you your massage. Who would you like to be massaged by? Prabhupada replied, any fool can do it. So the two godbrothers said, okay, Ishan, you can do it. So he was surprised. He said, so I get to massage Prabhupada every day. And so every day he would come on the bus and go to John Lennon's estate and massage Prabhupada. And he was telling me that sometimes Prabhupada would talk to him the whole time. Sometimes he would say a little bit. Some days he would say nothing. But he was telling me there was one day, and he said what happened that one day, he had to change buses somewheres on the route to John Lennon's estate. And the bus stop was in an area that was frequented by prostitutes. And so generally he said he tried not to even look at them. But he said this one morning he happened to look at this prostitute, and he said just for a moment he contemplated, well, maybe I could. And he caught himself. He said, no, I can't. And he got on the bus and he went to see Prabhupada. So he said that day he was massaging Prabhupada, a 1-hour massage, and he said Prabhupada only said 3 things. And the first thing he said was, Harinam, Harinam, Harinam eva kevalam, kalo nastyeva, nastyeva, nastyeva gataranyata. And Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given the perfect process, we simply have to follow. And then 20 minutes later, Ishan's massaging Prabhupada, he's massaging Prabhupada's leg, and Prabhupada pointed to his leg, and he said, do you see that scar? And Ishan said, yes, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, when I was a child, I was playing with matches, and my dhoti caught on fire. And I had the scar from that. So Ishan said, okay. And then Prabhupada didn't say anything for another 20 minutes. And then Ishan said, at the end of the massage, Prabhupada looked at him and said, and never play with fire. So Ishan said he put it all together. He looked at this prostitute in the morning. Prabhupada said, chanting Hare Krishna is the perfect way. Lord Chaitanya's system. Prabhupada had the scar on his leg. He was burnt when he was a child. And Prabhupada looked at him and said, don't play with fire. So he said, he realized that Prabhupada knew his inner heart. So Ishan was very fortunate that Prabhupada made that point to him. So again, materialistic life is very dangerous and very entangling. And it's important as Vaishnavas that we see that we don't want to become like Pururava. We don't want to be materialistic. And we want to be introspective. Especially sometimes for brahmacharis, they're trying to decide, well, should I stay brahmachari? Should I enter grahastha ashram? And that's a very deep question they have to examine in their lives. And in Bhagavad Gita, we read how in the 18th chapter, Krishna culminates by saying, Tam eva saranam gacha sarva bhavani bharata. Krishna says, just surrender unto me utterly. Just surrender utterly. And then following that, he says, Vimrisheshena atechasi yutam kuru. After saying, surrender to me utterly, Krishna says, deliberate on this fully, and then do as you wish to do. And so Prabhupada describes in that purport that the best way to surrender to Krishna is not blindly, but to deliberate on the subject matter as far as as far as one's intelligence can go, and then make the decision. So to really contemplate fully that, is this the proper way for me to surrender? Is this the proper activity for me? And then the next verse is Krishna says, now I'm going to explain to you the most secret knowledge, the most powerful knowledge. And then he says, Sarvadhamman Prityaja Mamnikam Sarahaman Puja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayas Yam Masacha. Then he says, just surrender unto me, and I will protect you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. So it's very important we realize that we have to very consciously make those kinds of decisions in our life with deliberation. Am I going to be a brahmacharini or a brahmachari forever? I'm going to be a brahmachari forever. Am I going to enter Grahastha ashram? We should think about that fully. Just like Kardama Muni, he thought about it very fully. And especially important, and sometimes a little problematic, sometimes we put so much emphasis on renunciation for individuals in the brahmachari ashram, and so much emphasis on not thinking about women and not thinking about sex, that the brahmacharis can end up mostly thinking about it by trying not to think about it, which becomes problematic. Because when they do get married, they could end up with a bit of a mentality like King Purava, that I'm just doing this for one thing, SEX, which is not actually the purpose of marriage. It's a part of marriage, but it's not the purpose of marriage. As we see with Kardama Muni, his first request was, my dear Lord, I think I need a wife of like disposition. And we see how Kardama Muni and Devahuti, they executed great austerities together. They served the Lord together. At that time, it was the method of worshiping the Supreme Lord by performing austerities. So they did that together. So that's the purpose of, the main purpose of Grihastha ashram is to give each other support in advancing in Krishna consciousness, and the aspect of sex, we see it in Purava, and we see the difference in Lord Kardama Muni. And that was just a part of his ashram. It wasn't his whole obsession. So it's very important that I think, especially for our brahmacharis, that they be trained to see what actually the Grihastha ashram is. That's an ashram for making spiritual culture. We're presenting a course here about Grihastha life, and what the advantageous aspects are, what the potential challenges and difficulties can be, and how you can work through those challenges. And it was interesting, many years ago, we gave the seminar in South Africa, in a few cities there. And then maybe 6-7 years later, we were at the Chopati temple, and one young man approached us, brahmachari, and he said, do you remember me? I said, I can't place your face. He said, I took your temple in Johannesburg.
Took your what?
Pardon? He took our course in Johannesburg, South Africa. And he said, when I took that course, I realized Grihastha ashram wasn't for me. So that was a success, because he realized, maybe I'm not cut out to be a Grihastha. Maybe I'm actually cut out to be a brahmachari. So that was actually a success. So it is important to know, what the Grihastha is, what Grihastha ashram is, what it's for, what are its challenges and difficulties. Just like we see Kardama Muni and Devahuti, they did great austerities. And so Grihasthas aren't performing austerities in this age by going to the forest and meditating. But our austerity is, in this age, Jagnai Sankirtanai Prayar Yajantihi Sumedasa, to chant Hare Krishna, and to live together peacefully and raise children. And that's also an austerity for those of you who have children. It's an austerity. There's many challenges in raising children. And by facing those challenges, we can actually advance in spiritual life. If we blur that line between Grihamedi and Grihastha, in Grihastha ashram, we might be facing those kinds of challenges and difficulties. Maybe the kids are sick and I have bills to pay and I've got to go to the temple and get on my rounds chanted. And it may seem difficult. And if we don't understand the difference between Grihastha and Grihamedi, we may start to think, well, maybe I am in a deep, dark well. Maybe this is a bottomless pit. But actually, it's not a bottomless pit. It's an ashram for making spiritual advancement. And those challenges that come upon us in whatever ashram we are in are meant for our spiritual elevation. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we chant in Shikshastaka how we have to be more tolerant than the tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respects to others. So actually in the Grihastha ashram, there's immense opportunity to practice those principles. When you're living in close association with your spouse, you begin to discover you have differences. And maybe there's things you disagree on. But that is an opportunity to practice respect and tolerance. And sometimes in devotional life, we may think that, well, I'm just going to pray to Krishna and he'll turn on a switch and one day I'm going to be more tolerant than the tree and completely humble and everything is just going to be so easy. My experience, it doesn't happen that way. Krishna arranges situations where we can practice humility and tolerance. And so Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's saying that if we can develop those qualities, we can chant the holy name constantly. We can develop a taste for chanting the holy name. We can develop a love for the holy name. We can develop a love for Krishna. We can develop a love for those around us. And that is the essence of spiritual life. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's telling us to develop tolerance. And actually, when we try to develop that tolerance in Krishna consciousness, developing that mood of bhakti, of loving service to Krishna, to the Guru, to our community, to our family, to our spouses, when we do that in bhakti, the tolerance, it becomes tempered with love, and it becomes patience. Patience is a lot different than tolerance. Tolerance, you're gritting your teeth and waiting for this to be over. Patience is, Hare Krishna, it's not that bad. So we want to become patient. We want that tolerance to come to patience. And that's why we're performing this Sankirtan Jagna in whatever ashram we are in. The key is to develop that kind of humility and tolerance and patience. And just like you live in communities, sometimes it's very pleasurable to live in communities, to have association, and then sometimes we grade each other the wrong way. We experience that every. That's normal. That's normal. Mm-hmm. But those kind of differences, if we can learn to respect them and work together, those differences can tend to become a source of strength, because again, they help us develop that spiritual attitude. So Srila Prabhupada, he was describing once, I think there was a problem in a temple somewhere, and Prabhupada was talking to the devotees, and Prabhupada said, it's just like you're in a boat going across the ocean. He said, you might not like some of the people on the ship, you might not get along with them, but Srila Prabhupada said, after all, you're trying to get across the ocean, you're on the boat, jumping overboard is not an option, and maybe throwing the person you don't like overboard is not an option. So he said, after all, Prabhupada said, somehow you have to make it work. You work together. And the association of devotees can help us develop that mentality, and marriage can also help us develop that mentality of working together to advance in spiritual life. And in that way we can have a peaceful life. So Prabhupada describes in his purport how only those who are very intelligent take to the Sankirtan Yagna to fulfill all their desires, material and spiritual. So one may have desires, and that's okay. One can engage in Krishna service, one can become a grahasta, one can live a peaceful life, comfortable life, and execute Krishna consciousness. The Bhagavatam says, Akama sarvo kamava moksha karma udaradi tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusham puram. Whether one has all material desires or no material desires, one should worship the personality of God. That's the process of bhakti. Everyone can engage in devotional service, whatever his situation, whatever his desires. So we see Kardama Muni, he actually had a desire, but he was also very absorbed in devotional service. King Pururava, I don't think he thought about Krishna for 10 seconds during this whole dialogue. And this is going on over many years with him and Urvasi. Spiritual life seems to be almost non-existent in his life. But even if we have material desires, they can be dovetailed in Krishna consciousness. And like one of the devotees explained to me, all this woodwork here, he said actually there's no nails in it. Apparently it's all put together by these special kinds of joints that lock the wood together. And so we may have these kinds of desires, like Kardama Muni had a desire for a wife. He admitted, actually, my Lord, I had this lustful desire. He actually admitted that. He was very open and honest with the Lord. But somehow he dovetailed that with the service of the Lord. And as Papa said, by dovetailing things with Krishna consciousness, then they can attain their perfection, then they can help us advance. Whereas if they're not dovetailed with Krishna, then everything comes apart, like you see with King Pururava's life. His life was always in just complete misery. So Bhagavatam is very interesting. It presents both sides of the coin, materialistic life and spiritual life, and how many elements are the same. Many elements are the same. And it just depends upon how we take advantage of our natures to use them in Krishna service for spiritual advancement. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions or comments.
Yes, you rightfully point out that one of the main qualities to develop is to be humble for Grihastha Ashram, but as well for chanting Hare Krishna in the long run time, if not eternally. The point is that I see in our society how we change. I'm from the 80s, Bhagavan was that. And at this time it was inconceivable for a new devotee to marry. It was direct, you go on Sankirtan, book distribution, you get spat and enjoyed by hundreds of people who clash their door on your head. And that's quite a good training because you start to realize you are a beggar and you beg for them to take the books and you change quite your mentality. Yes. And after some times you become accustomed to that. And in my analysis, then you are fit to marry if you want. If you wonder, I should marry or not marry, it means you should marry. Generally speaking.
Yes.
If you want, you are pondering, it means you are ready for marriage.
We're on the same page there.
Mostly, not always, but mostly. But I'm astonished how our society now changed, and I see new devotee 1 year old in the temple or 2 years. They got married all of a sudden, and because in the past the kings, Brahma himself, he did so many austerities before producing children, and the kings, they would stay with their wife for hundreds, thousands of years doing austerity under the water or like that. And then after they will conceive a child, because it's sophisticated science, the conception of a child of good quality, spiritually inclined. And unfortunately, I see that in our society there is some misunderstanding about that. In the sense that we take marriage in a cheap way. We have some desire, and we think the marriage will satisfy those desires. But of course, some aspect of the question is there that it will satisfy some desire, but the goal is different actually.
Yes, the goal is different. Yes. Sometimes, at the same time, devotees sometimes, we can be expert at going out and preaching to others and having that tolerance and patience with those on the outside. Something happens sometimes when we come into close association, either in the temple or in our ashrams or in our grihastha ashrams. Sometimes it's more difficult to be tolerant and patient with those who are our closest friends and those we love the most. It's an unusual phenomenon that we tend to be somehow triggered by those we love. So it's not that, going on Sankirtan definitely helps us develop those qualities, but at the same time, we have to make that concentrated effort also in our close association to also practice those qualities. Some of those things we're going to talk about.
So he's saying that austerity sets you up for understanding the real goals in life.
Right, yeah. That's a good, you're correct in saying that how by performing that Sankirtan Yajna and taking that austerity and facing those adversities, that helps you to develop that patience. And then I'm just trying to reinforce also that the key is to transfer that patience and tolerance into our close relationships. Sometimes that's challenging for individuals, even though they may have been Sankirtan devotees or very successful at Sankirtan. Sometimes they have a hard time in marriage, in close association, and that's a challenge. But there's skills you can learn to help with that. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Two bits. Thank you very much. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.
Guys, Partha Prabhu ki
Vaishnava Sangha Ki Jai.